Good morning, everybody. I'm David Rinaldi, Director of Studies and Policies here at FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. And we are very thankful for your presence once again in these policy breakfast meetings that we are organizing around quite an important concept. We want to, wake you up. Good morning, everybody. I'm David Rinaldi. By forcing little reflections on the type of employment that we want. So what is the employment we want? Of course, we have plenty of demands and plenty of wishes because the current labor markets in Europe, let's say, are at least suboptimal. Many things need to be changed. We have looked at how public initiatives could actually lead to better outcome and better occupational levels, thanks to a European initiative for zero unemployment territories. We'd look at skill issues, particularly with referring to the needs to drive an logical transition. We have looked also at worker data rights. And of course, one other extremely important aspect that we want our labor market to have is equality. Probably you have seen FEPS has been rather active on the topic, and we have published also a rather nice EU atlas, Care Atlas, with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, where we stress once again, as if there was even need to point it out, that the difference is not only the gap in pay that is around 13%, but we have a deeper gap due to segregation, due to the fact that women are more likely to engage in involuntary part-time, or they work less hours, so that at the end of the year, the earning gap is much bigger than these 13% and arrive up to 36%. So we have somehow a big gap still. European institutions have started to work in this domain, but probably still a lot has to be done. And we are here today with two experts. Professor Sophie Jacot is teaching here at the Université Saint-Louis de Bruxelles at Crespo and Institute for European Studies, and my colleague Laetitia Thyssen, Policy Analyst for Gender Equality at FEPS. Without further ado, I would love to give the floor to Laetitia. She is going to take us to a little journey, because we have a little limited time this morning, but we would like to have a glimpse about what are the different type of policies that already exist to drive fair pay and equal pay. So with her, we are going through some of the findings that you can find in this publication led by FEPS in collaboration with Fondation Jean Jaurès and the Fair Pay Innovation Lab on creating momentum for a fair pay, assessing policies with leverage.
Also to the participants for making it so early in the morning. And I look forward to the subsequent part of this discussion in presence of Professor Sophie Jacot. But before we kick off the discussion and especially the presentation with our special guest, we want also to give you some specific insights in some of the work that we have been doing when it comes to tackling gender inequalities in the labor market. And so, as my colleague David has already pointed out, it was crucial for us within this series to address the gender lens when it comes to gender inequalities in the labor market. And that is why we wanted to launch this discussion on reassessing gender inequalities in the labor markets by putting rights into practice through policies with leverage that will be of central concern in today's discussion. In fact, in 2022, a gender analysis of labor market reveals still a number of major paradoxes, contrasts, and contradictions. And considering that the unprecedented transformations of female employment have not necessarily prevented the persistence of inequalities on the basis of gender in the world of work, this policy breakfast session comes at a very peculiar time, especially when the COVID crisis, but also the cost of living crisis that is hitting Europe at the moment is having a magnifying glass effect on these imbalances. And so in light of the solid legal basis that the EU actually has in its possession to ensure gender equality, especially in the domain of employment, where it has been the strongest where it has had the strongest legislative bias explicitly enshrined in the treaties, followed by having a magnifying corresponding directives, as will be developed. And so in light of Professor Jacot, we will discuss together the opportunities and challenges arising from recent developments, offering progressive answers to old and new forms of gender inequalities in the labor market. But before we zoom into the policy study, I think it's also important to place into the context the discussion around the gender pay gap and especially tackling the issue of pay transparency that the European Commission has put on the table. And that is also a further step in implementing a principle that has been enshrined in the European treaties since the Treaty of Rome in 1957. And that has been also followed by several regulations and directives by the European Union. That being said, of course, today we are going to look into the work dynamics and relationships that can engender certain gender-based discriminations and imbalances, but it's also good to look at the big picture. In fact, women are often said to have entered the labor market massively in the 60s, but what is often missing from the picture is that women have always been working, but the only distinction being that essentially their contribution to the labor market has shifted from being an informal to a formal one, and thereby entering or moving from the reproductive to the productive economy. So those are elements to of course be taken into account, not to mention horizontal and vertical segregation on the labor market, whereby we have an overrepresentation of women in certain sectors that tend to be characterized by underpay and undervalue, as well as also other factors that are less commonly discussed, like the situation that women face when it comes to unemployment, and in particular how they are faced with inequality, insecurity, and invisibility. So here we may also want to raise a question: why do we speak of housewives whilst for the male counterpart we speak of unemployed? So these are some questions, and also not to mention, and also to finish also with the last point is the issue of underemployment, where we see that we have a high concentration of women in part-time work, as are some of the statistics of our Care Atlas together with the Friedrich Ebel Stiftung showing. And here also it's worth asking the question of the choice. What is truly a choice for women to engage in this form of atypical work that also brings many forms of inequalities? So now more about the policy study. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of Henrike van Platen, who unfortunately could not make it because of health reasons. But nevertheless, we could not prevent ourselves from still presenting you some of the main findings of this report that she has co-authored with Katinka Bose and Christine Grebe. And in this policy study, our main objective was to assess the different policy instruments to ensure fair pay and to discuss their leveraging effects. So if there is one message that can be remembered from this policy study, is that a mandated analysis of remuneration systems is key in achieving fairness for all. And moreover, putting fair pay into practice needs to be considered as a systemic issue and not an individual burden. So that is something that will come across the policy study that is really crucial to understand if we want to effectively address equal pay and most efficiently through corporate action, regular analysis of fair pay systems, benchmarks, and combined with fines should there be a lack of compliance. So why does it actually matter? As this quite clever advertisement is showing, it's about fairness first and foremost. So why should women accept a smaller share of their paid work if we would not necessarily be willing to do the same in other circumstances? But beyond this, we have to acknowledge that despite the fact that gender equality and the principle of equal pay has been enshrined in the treaties for many years, the gender pay gap has only narrowed at a very slow pace. And in fact, it has only decreased from 16% in 2010 to 13% in 2019 or 2020, according to the latest statistics that we have. And in this, also, there are important differences between member states, ranging from 1% in Luxembourg up to 22% in Estonia. But nevertheless, we can say that no country has ever managed to close the gap. And that situation is even worse for marginalized groups. Moreover, research has shown positive effects on various transparency, reporting, and auditing instruments. And in fact, a study conducted by Eurofound demonstrated that 1 in 4 companies implementing transparency measures went actually further than the legal requirement. And moreover, according to certain impact assessments, for every percentage point that the gender pay gap closes in the European Union, GDP may increase by +1 percentage point. Additionally, the issue of fair pay is also raising the question of the value of work and how do we actually measure the value of jobs. And in this sense, the pandemic has highlighted the systemic undervaluing of women's work, and it highlighted the gender segregated nature of labor markets, as well as the differences in pay between those sectors where the majority of women are working. So in that sense, even if the Pay Transparency Directive is not the full picture of the story, it is an important step towards the closing of the gender pay gap and an opportunity to take equality seriously. And so here now I'm going to take you through the different national practices that we have analyzed or that the authors have analyzed in this policy study, starting with the United Kingdom, which applies a radical transparency principle based on the 2010 Equality Act, which forces companies to publish data on their gender pay gaps if they have 250 employees or more, and whereby the organization's data is published publicly on the government website available to all, as you can, for instance, see here on the screenshot. And so within 1 year after the reporting, we have seen that this has triggered a huge interest in the gender pay gap and in companies' related performance, a bit based on the naming and shaming principle, but nevertheless creating a lot of discussion. And moreover, this also shifted the conversation towards fair working conditions for all, together with further advancements when it comes to the measurements of the pay gaps based on disability, sexual orientations, and other grounds. Nevertheless, COVID-19 also showed that gender equality sometimes tends to be sidelined in this type of circumstances, whereby the reporting deadline has been moved. So this, the case of the UK also shows us that pay transparency is essential to drive pay equality. However, reporting without sanction will not be able to close the pay gap equally. And so that moves us with the second best practice example, which is the case of Switzerland. In Switzerland, we have seen the 2020 Equality Act, where businesses were required, given that they had 100 employees or more, to respect a certain deadline for checking their pay structures. And so they had to carry out a pay analysis that needed to be repeated every 4 years. Moreover, the Swiss Federal Office for Gender Equality provided a standard tool for analysis, which allows companies, as of 2 employees only, to run very easily an analysis themselves, and where the results are checked by an independent body. In the case of the private sector, those are made available to employees and shareholders, whilst in the case of the public sector, they are openly published. Nevertheless, as in the case of the UK, we see no sanctions, and moreover, there is no standard procedure or registry for companies, so the real effects remain somehow hidden. And so that brings us to the case of Iceland, which has made itself famous for making gender discrimination in the domain of pay illegal, and with quite effective consequences or effects on the gender pay, on fair pay performances. In fact, the 2017 Equality Act provides a basis for audit and certification schemes for all companies as of 25 employees. And so any entity that would fail to comply must actually pay a fine for every day that is uncertified, amounting to 400 euros a day. And these certifications must be renewed every 3 years in order to also ensure fair pay to the employees. And so the Center for Gender Equality is also keeping a register for companies with or without certification. Last but not least, the Equality Act was updated again in 2020 in order to ensure fair pay for all persons regardless of gender. And that is that is a revolutionary provision in its design, and this has also inspired the European Parliament in its approach to the fair pay or the pay transparency directive. The next case, we are moving to Germany, where the approach is somehow different, because here what we see is that the Wage Transparency Act is focusing more specifically on individual action. And so here the major focus is laid on the individual right to disclosure, where employees in companies can ask for a comparative wage. However, there are no legal consequences. And so that tool is rarely used, even though employees can sue for a corresponding salary adjustment. Only a few court cases have opened since the enactment of the law. A famous example is the case of the journalist Birte Meyer, who has filed a complaint for not getting the same salary as her male counterpart, and yet her case was dismissed no later than July of this summer. And only 4% of the employees have actually used their rights to disclosure within 2 years in the making of the law. The next case is the case of France. And here in 2018, France has created a legally binding gender equality index. And so companies with above 50 employees must calculate the index based on a scale of 100 points and publish their score annually. If the companies fall under 75 points, fines will be imposed and change are mandated to close the examined gap. And so here on the right, you can, for instance, see an example of a company that's actually using the index to somehow also promote itself and boast about the score that it got. And what's interesting here is that the score is not only based on the gender pay gap, but also on a richer set of factors that include difference in the distribution of salary increases or in the distribution of promotions, but also the number of employees increased on their return from maternity leave, as well as the number of people in the underrepresented sex among the 10 highest paid positions. And the last case analyzed in this policy study is the case of Sweden, which is promoting a more holistic approach based on the motto, fix the system, not the women. And so here at the heart of the Swedish policies are the individual. And since 1971, individual taxation is in place, which is resulting in individual economic independence as a focal point in Swedish policymaking. The tax reform has motivated many women to work, especially full-time, and it is combined with a coherent strategy on daycare for children, a more egalitarian share of work and care, which is a lived reality as OECD data is showing. And the Swedish picture is also rounded up by transparency and fairness, both enshrined in the Swedish way of life. So everybody can check the wages and taxes of others at the Swedish tax office. And already since 2016, companies with 25 employees or more are required to submit reports on the state of equality. If gaps are found, it is mandatory to close the gap, otherwise fines can be imposed on the company. So overall, what we can see and what the policy study is also drawing from this assessment is that the level of intervention is quite crucial. And so here on the table, you can see an indicative summary that the authors have made in assessing the different tools that have been put in place in the different countries. And what is interesting also to note is that the proposal that was put on the table on pay transparency by the Commission, published in 21 and currently under negotiation, is combining the best of these instruments for fair pay, especially taking into account sanction mechanisms. So I hope this gives you a bit of an overview on some of the possible tools in order to assess fair pay. And I'm going to stop here, giving the floor back to David.
Thanks, Laetitia, for this very interesting overview on a lot of relevant national measures. But I now turn to Professor Jacot, not only to make sense of these different moves, because we have seen that the strategy behind some of these moves is very different. Some is, focusing more on the individual, some others on the corporations. But the issue that I would like you also to respond, you're also editor of Politique Européenne, one of the leading bilingual journals working on how science can improve the understanding of European policymaking. So there, I would like also to reflect on the question that comes out from Laetitia's presentation. So we have this mandate and this principle of equal pay and anti-discrimination in the labor market since 1957. Yeah. Can we be happy nowadays? I suppose not. We see positive moves, but where can we go? Professor Jacot, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to present. I think this is really a crucial subject and so timely indeed with the negotiation of the Pay Transparency Directive. I'm going to just share the few slides I have prepared. Okay. Yes, what I'm going to rapidly tackle is in fact so really the EU level and how is the governance of the equal pay policy managed at the EU level. I just, you see here, in fact, so the two main indicators that are used exactly to capture gender inequalities on the labor market, the gender pay gap that has already been mentioned, but there is also this second indicator, which is quite important, called the gender overall earnings gap, which is which has been developed a few years ago by Eurostat, and especially because the gender pay gap was considered as not totally satisfactory in order to reflect the diversity and also the systemic character of gender inequalities on the labor market, because the gender pay gap does not take into account a series of factors, and especially the fact that women participate less than men on the labor market. So this is something that it is combined into these new indicators, and you see that on this indicator the difference is 36.7%. So this is really what we have to deal with, and also so the fact that as I just summarized it there, and as David just explained, what is very important here is that we are in a situation where the public problem, the issue is in a way over-regulated. We have, or there is at the EU level, a very large panel of all the instruments that are available to the EU in order to treat this issue of pay discrimination, which are in place and which are in place starting in 1957. And Laetitia nicely showed it already. What we have is a paradox. The fact that we have this over-regulated, in a way, issue with primary law, secondary law, very huge amount of case law, but also a presence in soft regulation in the social and economic governments of the EU. We can come back on that, but there is a presence in some of these elements of and recommendation on equal pay, but yet it is what you see here, the gender pay gap, if we focus on this specific indicator, really only very slowly diminishes. So this is what I think in a very telling and nice phrase the European Equality Law Network calls a continuing source of sorrow for the EU. The fact that this issue, which is at the heart of the EU integration from legal, from an economic, from a political point of view, but also from an identity point of view. Equal pay is a fundamental right. It is a fundamental value. It is part of what the EU want to consider as its values. So you have this amount of regulation and yet a public problem which sticks, which never disappears, and something that can be considered as a persisting failure. How do you deal with that? In order to tackle that, I will focus on what has been done. So since the implementation of the so-called the 2006 directive, which was a directive that was here to take stock of all the legal case law and treaty modifications since 1957. And what happened since 2006 with the implementation of equal pay. What can we really learn from that and from the politics of equal pay at the EU level in a way? So the first observation, and in this table, I just tried to summarize, according to Commission's mandate, the different EU initiatives on the issue. So what we can see in the last 15 years is the fact that indeed the issue is governed in a way. There are action that is taken, there are continuous actions. Legal instruments are adopted, reports, studies, assessments are published, debates are being held on a regular basis. So the EU equal pay policy is present on the agenda almost every year since the beginning of the 2000s. However, the other thing that we can see from the table is the fact that there is an important consequence or effect of the political will and political orientation of the Commission, which of course is both at the initiatives and in charge of implementation. So the political factor here is really important, and it should be underlined that the issue is not dealt with in the same manner and with the same intensity all the time and by the different commission according to their level of commitment to gender equality promotion. And we know, for example, that the Barroso commissions were more conservative oriented, and this is showed by the level of action they took, which were less intense, in a way, less dense. The issue is less addressed, but it is also, when it is addressed with a lower level of constraints, especially. So also, I don't want to speak too long.
I think I might have
yes, sorry. Okay. Do you?
You had another slide to present?
Yes.
Because I already have another couple of questions. Otherwise, they're coming
okay.
your way. I will give you the floor to continue. Please.
Okay. I don't know what happened. Sorry. Yes, just a few words. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Yeah, so what I wanted to underline, and sorry, I don't know what happened, is that when you look at how the issue is dealt, there is clearly two different conceptions of equal pay that can be seen, and so the issue is not dealt with in the same manner, and it is because it is not framed in the same manner. And the policy instruments which are designed are not neutral. They are not only technical, they are really profoundly political. And to make it short, there is a substantive understanding of equal pay, one which especially recognize that the issue of pay discrimination is a systemic issue, and that there is a systemic devaluation of women's work. And also a more narrow understanding of equal pay, especially carried out by the Employers Association, which tends to focus on the individual responsibility for equal pay. The structural nature of inequalities, which originates in history, in cultural norms, is acknowledged, but the responsibility for these inequalities remain individual rather than collective in this understanding. And a few words finally on the road ahead, and with the pay transparency proposal, which is at the moment under negotiation. And I wanted to underline that it will certainly be a rocky road for the negotiation. And it really shows the importance again of political will. And we know that the European Parliament has always been a major gender equality promoter, yet things are becoming more and more difficult also at the level of the European Parliament. And I'm using here as an example the study by Copeland, Elomaki, and Gaweda, very, very recent, and they show, if I have just 1 minute or to explain this, it is really interesting. They compare the legislative processes within the EP of different social directives, and what they show is two things. The fact that when a directive or a proposal has to do with gender, then it raises more conflict than other types of social directives. And there is more amendments, and the size of the majority is also thinner. And so when it is a gender directive, it is more difficult, more bumpier in a way, but also it is becoming more and more difficult. For example, if you compare the work-life balance directive and the pay transparency proposal, the number of amendments was again higher for the Pay Transparency Directive than it was with the Work-Life Balance directives, and the size of the majority for accepting to enter into negotiation was thinner in the case of the Pay Transparency Directive. So we are really in turbulent times. There are more and more science and politicizations with regard to gender equality in general, and this has some consequences on the legislative process and on what can become of this proposal on pay transparency.
Thanks a lot, Professor Jacot. I think we should perhaps shame not only companies that don't apply fair pay, but maybe even interest groups or countries that you're saying are not backing gender parity. I think that the two presentations of yours were a little bit longer than expected, but both very informative and complementary in the sense we've looked at the member states' initiatives and at the European framing. I would have plenty of questions to go your way, but I will actually rely on those that arrive from the people that are following us on Zoom. I'll put forward two to the two of you, and I'll give you the floor to respond as you wish to the two questions. One comes from Slovakia, from Bennett Wright, who's an HR expert, and he's wondering, okay, particularly I suppose for small and medium enterprises, if there are tools or easy to be used framing in which equal pay can be applied. So methodologies that can be followed, because in some cases, some companies might be virtuous enough that they don't need the state to tell them that that's a good thing. Maybe somebody wants to move. So if you are aware of tools that can make it easier for some companies to follow the good practices. Another question is instead from Francisca on I would call it the economic governance. Somehow she's wondering whether besides working on regulation on equal pay, there could be possible to improve on the equality of the labor market by other means, other tools, financing, coordination, European semester, many tools that the European Union could use. So these are the two first questions. I would like to pose them to you. I don't know, Professor Jacot, if you want to start, perhaps, then we give the floor to Laetitia.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I'm more equipped to answer to the second question. And yes, of course, this the word has been used, and I think it's a good one. There needs to be a holistic strategy in a way in order to tackle pay discrimination. Of course, pay transparency cannot be the only tool, and in fact, the pay transparency proposal is not only about pay transparency in a way, but it is the easier instrument, since it is the one that is the more constraining. But of course, using gender obligations within the social and economic architecture and economic governance within the EU coordination instruments like the European semester, the European social pillars, and all those instruments is extremely important. We have research showing that for some periods, the constraints which was imposed on the member states to take into account gender within this type of instruments was less important. It had an effect, and the lesser the constraints, the less actions the member states take. So these instruments, gender mainstreaming in a way, is really important. It is bearing some fruits, but research also show that these instruments are underused, and it is really difficult to go beyond the fact that, in a way, they consolidate mostly models of competitiveness and of fiscal disciplines rather than tackling inequalities. But yet they can be useful. Laetitia has done very, very interesting work also showing that when there is no orientations given on how to integrate gender into member state policies, then some use it, some don't, and you don't have really important development, or it's much more difficult that if you do not use these tools, which are not satisfactory, but should be there anyway to lead the way in a way.
Laetitia.
Thank you. And perhaps I'll pick up then on the first question when it comes to evaluation of the gender gaps. And in this sense, again, the proposal set on the table by the European Commission is really an important step forward, because what it does is that it's combining the best tools that are already out there and trying to make the best out of it, because it is setting a coherent framework for fair pay, and transparency is one component of it, but there's also much more than that. And here the major points included in this proposal is, of course, setting a standard on pay transparency and reporting mechanisms that should be coherent and uniform across the European Union. And here information is key, because without having access to that sort of information, no employee is in the position to actually know that there is such a discrimination taking place in the labor market at the first place. So that would be the first major point. Second is actually requiring a gender-neutral job evaluation system. And that was briefly mentioned earlier, but it's also important to be aware that evaluation systems are also not gender-neutral. Many times they rely on strong gender bias, on what should be difficult work, on what should be valued or not, and that are many times also reflecting certain gender divisions of role taking place in a professional environment. The third point, as mentioned, is the right for information to workers, that is then enabling them to actually make the case in order to contest the situation. Fourth point, and that is a crucial one, is shifting the burden of proof for pay on the employers. And here we go back again to this argument on shifting the burden from the employee to the employers, because then in that case, it's really crucial that it's the employer who needs to prove that there has been such a form of discrimination, or that there hasn't been in this case. And last point is also setting sanctions and remedies in case of non-compliance. Because as was showed in the case of the UK, if there is the absence of actual sanctions and consequences, well, there is actually no cost in not complying with this sort of measures. So without that, we do not have the guarantee that this sort of measures will materialize. And in this sense, also many proactive forms of law have already been developed since the 80s, most notably in the case of Sweden, but also Canada and Finland, which are characterized by different elements, but it's important that it applies to all employees and also across sectors, because many times what we compare is within one sector, but what we don't see is that the picture is also more complicated, and we need to be able to understand why, for instance, certain sectors are more valued than others. And perhaps the last point that I wanted to bring within this discussion is also to question the male norm that is often seen as the mainstream norm, where we have seen that access for women women to certain positions have been understood according to a certain lens that is not necessarily also matching the true needs of women in a working environment, be it when it comes to working hours, being to the schedules of certain meetings, requirements to travel, access to a crèche, to childcare education. So all in all, it's also about perhaps reshifting the way that we conceive working relationships.
Thanks a lot for this. I take the freedom of asking you another question that is coming from the audience, and I enlarge a little bit the scope of the question that came from Andreas, asking to the two of you somehow what are your expectations for the work that the European Institute for Gender Equality can do in the near future. Andreas correctly pointed out that this argument of the administrative burden on corporations it's full of flaws, and we have seen that somehow the burden and can happen once every 4 years, or they have a lot of time in some member states, to start to comply. So they can adapt slowly. I don't see a huge burden there, but maybe how the new European Institute for Gender Equality can help them through instruments that make it easier, or how it can support better policy making through data and through, I don't know, cooperation between even national institutes.
I don't know, Laetitia, do you want to start or?
But perhaps, here, if we are speaking eager, one of the crucial points is offering data. And it's also making us aware of the scope of the situation. Many times we rely on statistics like Eurofound, but EGE nevertheless is playing a very important role in tracking the different developments across member states. What is the situation on a national basis? They also contribute also to shaping the debate and how we can improve and shift the perception on the importance of tackling the issue. So first and foremost, I think that's a crucial point, being aware of the scope of the problem, because many times when we speak about gender equality, it's the lack of information.
Yes, exactly. I think that it is really key, and EGE will and continues to have this role of expanding the visibility and also providing new visibility to new types of data. It was instrumental, for example, in pushing for the fact that this new indicator on the gender overall earning gaps will be taken on board by Eurostat. And it is really an important issue. Yet, of course, EGE is and remains a small institution. It will not be in the position to really, for example, we had this question about concrete instruments and methodologies. I'm not sure that EGE, with the small budget, small institutions, will be able to really to do that. And this will be certainly something that will be a crucial point in the negotiations to come about the enforcement of the different elements of the directives. It will be one point of conflict within the negotiation, along, for example, with the number of employees at the level of which the sanction starts to enforce. At the moment in the proposal, it is 250 employees, and we have seen in the policy study that was presented that it is rather higher settings. There are a lot of countries, and the most successful, which have imposed a lower level or a lower limit and a fewer number of employees to start imposing evaluation and audits of the situations. This will really be also a very important point in the negotiation.
Allow me a final, a bit silly question, because I'm going to ask you about a silver bullet to, to drive equality in the European labor markets. And it's clear that the silver bullet cannot be there, particularly because we have seen that we want an overarching vision that can deliver on a transformative vision. It's difficult to do it with one policy measure only. But if you have to pin one specific policy measure that you would like to see implemented in the near future, what would you pick? In 30 seconds each. Very easy exercise, I recognize it.
I would say that really the key is in the sanctions. And also this would be a very conflictual point in the negotiation, and the key is in the sanctions at the level of the organizations, because it is really a point that is efficient. It is something that works and really something where the EU could be imposing and setting the tone here, and also implementing, being instrumental in implementing these sanctions.
Thanks. Duly noted. Laetitia?
Well, I could only echo what Sophie has been saying, but perhaps also to complement in this regard, I would also add, and that is something that has been very much stressed by the different stakeholders, is the inclusion of trade unions and the importance of collective bargaining. Many times that was perhaps something that was blamed for in the proposal in general. So that is something that will need to be followed very closely. How do we make sure that we actually enhance and make sure that they can also play the role in defending workers having their rights secured? So that is for one side. And on the other is also to acknowledge that pay transparency is not only about pay. And so that also goes hand in hand with ensuring adequate care facilities, which also make it at the same time possible for women and everyone in the labor market to have to basically be in line with the equal carer and equal worker model.
Yes, just one very important point, I think, of the proposal is the fact that it gives more weight to the trade unions in collective bargaining about pay transparency, but it also includes new actors that were not in the previous directives, that is to say NGOs and equality bodies, which are proposed to be given some grounds to sue the companies. And this is really a very important point, I think.
Thanks a lot to Professor Sophie Jacot from Université Saint-Louis. Thanks a lot to Laetitia Thyssen, FEP's policy analyst on gender equality. We hope you enjoyed this session. I think it should be a must for a lot of people that so far have not worked on gender policies. So we'll try as FEPs to keep the work active on how to mainstream gender also in different policy field. So remain connected with the work with FEPs. Coming up, for instance, a work on the Care for Care to follow in partnership with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the initiative of the Commission on the European Care Strategy. We are also monitoring with the Recovery Watch what is happening to the spending with the Next Generation EU in terms of care, in terms of creating jobs for women. And these are just a few of the initiatives that regard gender in the next few weeks here at FEPS, but more to come and the rest of the year. And please continue to connect and share your opinion on this talk. Continue to ask questions to our speakers through social media. Use the hashtag employment breakfast so that we can remain connected and further exchange opinion on this important topic. Thanks a lot for taking the time, and let's reconnect soon.
Thank you.
Right.